In the quiet suburbs of Willow Creek, nothing ever really happened until the day a woman named Karen decided she ruled the neighborhood. She called herself the president of an HOA that didn't even exist, and she wanted everyone to obey her rules. When the Johnson family moved in, she demanded they pay her membership fees. But when they refused, Karen didn't just complain, she called the police. No one could have guessed that this single phone call would set off a chain of events, leading straight to the FBI, a federal raid, and secrets darker than anyone imagined. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss any of these unbelievable true stories. Drop a like if you love real-life drama, and comment below what you would do if a neighbor tried to control your life. The Johnsons had spent years saving for their dream home, a modest two-story house with a white fence, trimmed hedges, and a small porch swing where their kids could watch fireflies at night. For Mark and Emily Johnson, this was their fresh start. They'd left the noise of the city behind for the promise of quiet streets and friendly neighbors. At first, Willow Creek looked like everything they'd hoped for. The neighbors waved politely, kids rode bikes without fear, and the air smelled of barbecues and freshly cut grass. Then came Karen. Karen Miller lived 3 houses down. She was in her late 50s, always wore pastel cardigans, and had a clipboard glued to her hand like it was an extension of her arm. She introduced herself the very first day the Johnsons moved in, not with cookies or a smile, but with a packet of printed community guidelines. Emily smiled politely, assuming it was a friendly gesture. But when she flipped through the papers, she noticed fees, fines, and a logo that said, Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Mark frowned. "We didn't see anything about an HOA in the property documents," he said. Karen chuckled, the sound sharp and practiced. "Oh, it's implied. Everyone here contributes to maintain neighborhood standards. You'll be getting your first invoice next week." Mark tried to stay calm. "Sorry, but there's no legal HOA attached to this property." "We already checked." Karen's smile tightened. "Then maybe you should have done better research. Around here, I enforce the rules." At first, the Johnsons brushed it off. Maybe she was just overzealous. Maybe she meant well. But as the days turned into weeks, Karen's obsession grew. She took pictures of their lawn if it wasn't mowed. She left notes about unauthorized decorations. One morning, Emily found a warning taped to their mailbox. "Failure to comply may result in community action." They didn't know it yet. But Karen wasn't just a controlling neighbor. She was hiding something far worse than petty power. For weeks, the Johnsons tried to ignore her. They smiled through her fake greetings, threw away her warning notes, and focused on their children, Ethan and Lily, who had already fallen in love with the quiet cul-de-sac. But peace never lasts long when control is someone's addiction. Karen began escalating. First, she started measuring their grass, with a ruler literally standing in front of their yard at 7 a.m., clipboard in one hand, tape measure in the other. Then she began taking photos of their car, their trash bins, even their guests. Mark finally confronted her one evening as she stood snapping pictures of his driveway. "Karen, that's enough. You're trespassing." Karen didn't flinch. "I'm documenting violations. Your trash can is visible from the street. It's against the rules." Mark laughed, disbelief in his voice. "What rules?" "You made them up." Her face hardened. "If you don't comply, I'll call the authorities." And she did. 2 days later, the Johnsons were sitting down to dinner when flashing lights lit up their windows. 2 police cars pulled up outside. Karen stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching proudly like she'd summoned justice itself. Mark opened the door, confused. "Evening, officers," he said. "Is there a problem?" The officer's tone was polite but firm. "Sir, we received a complaint about a disturbance and a possible neighborhood violation." Behind them, Karen's voice rang out shrill and confident. "He's been harassing me. He refuses to follow the HOA guidelines and threatened me when I tried to enforce them." Emily stood beside her husband, shocked. "That's a lie." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, let's all calm down. We'll sort this out." Mark handed over his property documents. showing there was no HOA legally registered for Willow Creek. The officer reviewed them carefully, then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, there's no record of this association." Karen's lips trembled with frustration. "That's because it's community-based. We don't need the government's approval to have standards." Her voice cracked into hysteria as neighbors began peeking out their windows. Within minutes, the officers realized there was no crime. They left, apologizing to Mark and Emily for the misunderstanding. But humiliation is a dangerous thing for someone who thrives on control. Karen's embarrassment turned to rage. That night, she sat alone in her living room, scrolling through her old files plotting her revenge. She started digging into the Johnsons' lives online, searching, stalking, twisting any detail she could find. She left anonymous complaints to the city about illegal home improvements. She called child services with false claims about neglect. Each move was more desperate than the last. But Karen didn't know that someone else had been watching her, too. It started with a man named Detective Alan Reyes, a federal agent working on a completely unrelated case. A few months earlier, the FBI had begun investigating a small web of identity theft and mail fraud in the area. Someone was stealing checks, falsifying community forms, and selling residents' information on the dark web. One of the names that kept appearing on suspicious documents was Karen Miller. At first, Reyes thought it was coincidence. A nosy neighbor, maybe an overactive HOA member. But when reports from Willow Creek started piling up, all connected to Karen's association, the pieces began to fit together. Her fake HOA wasn't just a power trip. It was a cover. Karen had been using her self-proclaimed HOA to collect personal data, phone numbers, emails, addresses, even bank details, from new homeowners who thought they were paying legitimate neighborhood fees. Mark and Emily's refusal to join her little empire didn't just bruise her ego, it threatened to expose her operation. And now the FBI was watching. The morning after the police visit, Willow Creek seemed quieter than usual. The neighbors whispered behind curtains, pretending not to stare as the Johnson kids walked to the bus stop. Mark and Emily tried to move on, but they could feel the weight of unseen eyes, judgment, curiosity, fear. Karen, meanwhile, was busy playing the victim. She posted in local Facebook groups about the dangerous family on her street. She warned others that the Johnsons were troublemakers, lawbreakers, and unfit for the community. Her posts spread fast. Small-town gossip always does. But what Karen didn't realize was that every post, every false report, every email she sent was quietly being tracked. Detective Reyes had been monitoring her digital footprint for weeks. He'd noticed patterns, emails from Karen's HOA, account that linked to fraudulent credit applications, strange payments to offshore accounts, and identity information belonging to residents who had once paid dues. At first glance, it looked like small-scale fraud, but when Reyes dug deeper, he uncovered something far worse. Karen's HOA was part of a wider scam ring that had been targeting retirees and new homeowners across multiple states. And Karen wasn't just a participant. She was one of the organizers. Back in Willow Creek, Karen's paranoia was growing. She noticed unfamiliar cars driving slowly past her house. She started covering her windows with foil, convinced the Johnsons had put the government on her. Her once perfect lawn turned patchy as she spent nights pacing, muttering to herself, refreshing her security cameras every hour. One afternoon, as Mark returned from work, he noticed Karen standing on her porch staring at him. "Something funny about you, Mark," she hissed. "You think you're smarter than me. You think the police are on your side." Mark just shook his head. "Karen, please, leave us alone." She smiled, cold and hollow. "Oh, I will. When you're gone." That night, Karen drafted a new letter. This time, it wasn't just a violation notice. It was a direct threat, disguised as official HOA correspondence. She slid it into the Johnsons' mailbox just before midnight. What she didn't know was that Reyes' team had placed a surveillance camera nearby, tracking her movements for evidence. Within 24 hours, the FBI had enough to make their move. It was a Friday morning. Sunlight filtered through thin clouds. Birds chirped over the hum of sprinklers, and the smell of coffee filled the Johnsons' kitchen. Emily was packing lunches for the kids when she noticed the sound. Low, rhythmic, distant at first, then growing louder. Engines, tires, radios crackling. When she looked outside, her heart skipped. 4 black SUVs rolled down the street, stopping directly in front of Karen's house. Armed agents stepped out, vests marked FBI, moving with practiced precision. Neighbors emerged from their doorways, whispering, recording on their phones. Karen opened her front door just as an agent shouted, "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Step outside, hands where we can see them." Her confusion turned to panic. "There's been a mistake. I'm the HOA president," she screamed. But the agents ignored her words as they entered her home. For the first time, Karen Miller wasn't in control. Inside, the agents uncovered stacks of fake documents, forged property notices, and printed lists of homeowners' bank details. There were also envelopes filled with checks from other neighborhoods, fake business licenses, and an entire binder labeled HOA contributions, confidential. Detective Reyes watched from the front yard, arms crossed. When Karen was let out in handcuffs, the neighbors stood in stunned silence. Some gasped, others whispered. Mark and Emily watched from their porch, not with glee but disbelief. For months, they'd been tormented by a woman who thought she could bully her way through life. Now she was being escorted into a black SUV, her world collapsing around her. As the vehicles drove off, the quiet of Willow Creek returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was the kind that follows truth. Later that week, Detective Reyes stopped by to speak with Mark. He thanked the family for their patience, explained that Karen's operation had been under surveillance for months, and that their complaints had helped confirm the final link in the chain. Sometimes, he said, justice just takes a little longer to show up. Mark nodded. "We just wanted peace," he said softly. "That's all we ever wanted." Reyes smiled faintly. "And now you've got it. She won't bother anyone again." For days after the raid, Willow Creek sat in uneasy silence. No more notes appeared on mailboxes. No more rules posted on lampposts. Karen's house, once the picture of suburban pride, now stood dark, its blinds shut tight. A for sale sign planted crookedly in the yard. The Johnsons didn't celebrate. They didn't boast or post about it online. They simply exhaled for the first time in months. Mark mowed the lawn in peace. Emily hung wind chimes on the porch that danced in the soft breeze. The kids played freely again. Neighbors who had once sided with Karen started coming by, some embarrassed, some relieved. "Did you know?" one woman whispered. "She took money from us, too." "Said it was for road repairs." Mark just shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "We didn't know how deep it went." Across town, the FBI processed boxes of evidence. What they found was staggering. Forged tax forms, falsified HOA accounts, over $400,000 in stolen checks and deposits traced across 5 states. Karen's community association had been nothing more than a shell, a weapon she used to control, to steal, to hide her crimes behind the facade of civility. When the news broke, it spread fast. Local channels ran the story. Fake HOA president arrested in multi-state fraud scheme. Her mugshot, once the face of forced perfection, flashed on screens for everyone to see. Neighbors who'd once feared her now turned away in disbelief. But even in disgrace, Karen refused to take responsibility. In court, she blamed everyone, the homeowners, the city, the Johnsons, even the system that caught her. Yet the evidence spoke louder than her excuses. She was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and harassment. Back in Willow Creek, the world moved on. The lawns grew greener, children's laughter returned, and for the first time in years, neighbors began trusting each other again. They organized a real community meeting, not to enforce rules, but to build friendship. Mark stood before them, nervous at first, then calm. He didn't give a speech about revenge or justice. Instead, he said, "We all came here looking for peace. Maybe we forgot that. Peace isn't something you control, it's something you protect together." The crowd applauded softly, nodding in agreement. That night, the neighborhood lights glowed warm again, as if the street itself could finally breathe. Meanwhile, in her cell, Karen stared at the wall. The walls were plain, cold, stripped of color, no flowers, no fence lines, no rules to hang. All she had left was silence. She'd built her kingdom on fear and lies, and now she was its only prisoner. Outside those walls, the Johnsons watched the sun set from their porch swing, the same one they'd dreamed about when they first moved in. Ethan leaned against his father and asked, "Dad, is she ever coming back?" Mark looked at the fading sky. "No," he said. "Some people don't know how to live free without controlling others, and sometimes life teaches them the hard way." Emily smiled softly, her hand resting on his. "We made it through," she whispered. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of jasmine through the air. For the first time in a long while, Willow Creek felt like home again. Months later, a small letter arrived in the Johnsons' mailbox. Official letterhead, federal seal. Inside was a simple note from Detective Reyes. "Case closed. Thank you for standing your ground. The neighborhood is safer because you did." Mark folded the note, placed it in a frame, and set it by the door. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing means standing up when it's hardest. That real strength isn't in control, it's in courage. And that even in the quietest neighborhoods, darkness can hide behind the prettiest fences until truth finally breaks through.